Well, my dudes, it's 420 today, which is the day that potheads use as an excuse to do the thing that they do every other day anyways. And so I thought, in the great tradition of Catholics and Christians who only ever think about their faith when they're trying to find an excuse for their bad behavior, we could examine this question of whether or not it's okay for Christians to do drugs. Now, for clarity's sake, I'm only going to be examining this question with respect to recreational drugs as opposed to medicinal use. I think the church is pretty clear on this question that as long as you're consulting a doctor and you're being responsible about the application of prescription medication, it's not only allowed, but often a good thing. There are two aspects of drug use that I think are worth considering as part of this question. And the first is that they tend to impair us. The second is that they can expose us to transcendent mystical experiences. So in looking at that first aspect, what do we mean by impairment? Well, all of those qualities that help us exercise our free will, our judgment, our reason, our physical and mental faculties, all of those things become compromised when we're impaired. We aren't sensing and interpreting the real world around us as it actually is, and so we aren't able to make sound judgments about how to operate within that reality. I'd say that these qualities that are impaired are the qualities that make us uniquely human. And if you're a Christian, you should understand them in even more significant terms. We Christians believe that God created us in His image. This spark of divinity is what we're talking about here. Freedom, intelligence, and the ability to make sound judgments and actions. These are the things that we forfeit when we become impaired. So why would we want to do that? Well, there's something about those qualities that inhibits us from letting loose, right? Our inhibitions, informed by our good reason and judgment, can sometimes discourage us from acting crazy in such a way that might maximize our exposure to fun and pleasure in a given moment. But if we impair ourselves through drugs or alcohol, then we won't have to deal with those pesky misgivings. And I'd say that this is probably a motivator for a lot of people. So in re-examining this question, if impairing and suppressing those qualities that make us most like God is the outcome of our drug use, do we think that that's something that God approves of? The other aspect that I described earlier is that some drugs open us up to profound, transcendent, and mystical experiences. So some people might argue that for people that want to grow in their spirituality, this is actually a good thing. There are even clinical studies that have considered the implications of this kind of thing. William James, who is often considered the forefather of American psychology, looked extensively at mystical and religious experiences as an antidote to the many psychological disorders that we suffer from. He noticed that these kinds of experiences help us find more permanent forms of happiness, and they also help us to embrace more altruistic behaviors. Researchers have also noticed that those kinds of mystical experiences that are usually the outcome of very deeply spiritual lives can be reproduced or even faked using psychedelic drugs. In the early 90s, Dr. Rick Strassman administered DMT, which is like a really powerful psychedelic drug, to some 60 volunteers of his study. And over half of them reported having profound encounters and interactions with non-human disembodied beings. And that for many of them, this experience had long-lasting and significant effects on them. Researchers at Johns Hopkins have tried to recreate these same mystical experiences using psilocybin, which is the active ingredient in magic mushrooms. But in their experiments, they've introduced an interesting variable, which is that they've recruited religious leaders in their respective communities to undergo those trials. And that's where I'd like to tease out some conclusions. I think that they're drawing from a principle that would say that profound knowledge or experiences only come naturally to those who are ready for them. So for Christians, that might look like somebody who has lived a life that is very close to God, so that if they were to receive some kind of mystical revelation, it would be something that they would be prepared for, that they could handle, and that they would gain some growth and insight from. Like the stigmata of St. Francis of Assisi, I think for most of us, we'd probably be traumatized by an experience like that. But for him, it only helped him grow in intimacy with God. For those of us who haven't reached those kinds of heights, to artificially produce a mystical experience like that might have dangerous consequences because of our lack of preparedness for it. Knowledge is a powerful thing that should be disseminated gradually. Like in an education scenario, you don't introduce immature students to the most difficult concepts. You build up to that so that when the time comes when they're exposed to it, They'll be ready for it. Another analogy that might help is money or power. If you give a lot of money or power to somebody who hasn't earned it, they won't appreciate the value of it because it hasn't cost them anything. A person who has had to earn their wealth will have a deeper appreciation for it because they likely had to make sacrifices to earn it. And when the time comes for them to receive their reward, they will probably have learned a thing or two about managing it responsibly. But if you were to give millions of dollars to your average 20-something bro, he's probably going to make some pretty stupid decisions with it. In Christianity, mystical experiences aren't that common. God chose to reveal himself most profoundly in the incarnation of his Son. He meets us where we are at in ways that are accessible and not overwhelming. It's only the saints among us that are able to peek behind that curtain for a reason. They're ready for that vision. Most of us are not. I don't know if psychedelic drugs produce authentic mystical and religious experiences or not, but whether they're artificial or the real thing, there's something in that that contradicts the pattern by which God has chosen for us to encounter him. If we want mystical experiences, we should pray for them and let God decide if he thinks we're ready for them or not. Thanks so much for watching, guys. If you enjoyed that, then please consider subscribing and liking, and come find me on Facebook and Twitter. It's a huge help when you do that. It helps us get these videos in front of more and more people. And a big thank you goes out to You Catholic for presenting these videos. And if you want to support the making of these videos, then please consider supporting my work as a digital media and marketing expert. My company, Holdsworth Design, specializes in branding, web and graphic design, marketing, social media, videography, and all that kind of good stuff. So if you know of a parish, a diocese, a ministry, or a business that needs help in those areas, then please send them our way and I'm sure we can help them out.